The concept of a scraper, be it with a card scraper, a scraper plane, or a turning tool, it's all pretty much the same. Turn a hook on a piece of steel and let the hook do the work. Today we'll discuss the turning side of that equation. For the most part, turning tools do not need as sharp an edge as our hand tools. We don't go for that polished finish. In fact, most of us will use these tools straight off a grinding wheel. I think this is an 80 grit or it might be 120 grit. But in sharpening is as simple as coming over, dropping it on, and getting back to work. Because I've now got a rolled burr on top of this edge that actually grips my fingernail. I mean, you can feel it quite a bit. But that isn't a very aggressive burr. Just as if you were sharpening on, an 80 grit diamond stone or water stone. So let's look at the edge that was created. You can see I just came off the grinder and my pencil, it kind of stops on the edge. You can even see shavings coming off of the pencil on that very edge. And that's a tiny burr, or actually it's a pretty big burr, that's kind of curled off the edge. The metal has somewhat folded over a little bit. That burr is what is going to be doing all the cutting when you are turning. But I want you to notice a few things. Besides the fact that this edge is not 90 degrees like a card scraper. It's actually angled back quite a bit. And that allows you to get into certain spots. And you also notice that I haven't done it in a while, but I will generally grind off this heel right here because it allows me to get into corners a little bit easier, because these are curves and they're coming around on this inside. So if you have it perfectly square, a lot of times you will end up hitting this inside corner before the edge actually gets a chance to hit the wood. Now that burr is actually folded around. It is not right jutting out this way. It's folding around this way. And to show that to you, if I take my scraper and I have it at straight 90 degrees or even a little bit positive, if I engage the wood, it doesn't really make shavings. But if I lower the edge a little bit, so now I'm at a positive, now the shavings start coming off because it's now engaging that burr. Which also the reason why you have this distance right here. In a normal turning tool, I would get this as close to the wood as I possibly could, because most of the cutting edges are pretty close. But with a scraping tool, I actually have to come down a little bit. I have to come down into this space in order to get that negative 90 degrees or negative horizontal angle. Now this right here is straight off a grinder, and it's what you would call a pretty aggressive cut. Notice I'm engaging right at the midpoint, so my tool rest is high enough so that I can angle it down and still engage at the midpoint. And it makes pretty thick shavings coming across. But real quickly, I'm going to engage one spot over and over. I'm not changing the rotation of my tool, and eventually it will just stop cutting. See how those shavings are getting finer? That burr is going away. And as soon as that burr goes away, pretty much stops cutting. But if I rotate it a little bit to engage another part of the blade, it'll engage a little bit more. Okay? So, even though you have the burr only lasts about 8 to 10 seconds, it only lasts 8 to 10 seconds on each individual spot. So that's why that curve rotation can give you a lot of cutting action. And if you're doing it at the bottom of a bowl, you can actually do quite a bit of work because you're actually engaging each individual section of this giant curve for only a fraction of a time as you do the entire inside curve of a bowl. So you can make many, many passes with it. Now this one was straight off of a grinder, so it is what they call aggressive. That burr is quite big. Most of the time, I'm not using a scraper to waste away material. That's what a bowl and spindle gouge is for. They're a lot better at that one, and you have a lot more speed and control there. These are generally for a finishing cut. So I would prefer to have a very tiny, tiny burr, or no burr at all, just a perfect 90 degrees. And that is the basis of pretty much all carbide tools, as they don't really have a burr. So how can you get rid of the burr and add a new one back on that you control its size? Well, when I'm scraping, I generally will keep a little 1200 grit diamond stone, but you can just use sandpaper right on your rail if you want. And I will flip my scraper over and just run it back and forth. And all this does is remove the burr. I'm not flattening, I'm not sharpening, I'm not doing anything. I just remove the burr, and if I run my fingers on both ways, I cannot feel any kind of burr. It's a straight 90 degrees, and if I ran my finger this way, I would probably cut myself. And if you do that one straight off your grinder, you could actually cut with this edge. But because I've been scraping a little bit, it's ever so slightly rounded, and all I did was remove the burr. So I actually need to add a burr back on. So that is where I will take something harder than the steel, and since we're now using stuff like M2, M4 high-speed steel, you pretty much need to go to something like tungsten or carbide or something really, really hard to put a burr on these things. And what I would do is I will engage the bottom bevel and then rotate it up. And that allows me to gain consistency. If I don't engage the bottom bevel and I just run it along the edge, I never know the results I'm going to get. It's that bottom bevel, and because I ground this on a round wheel, there's a pivot point. Can you hear it? Click, 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 click. So all I got to do is if I just run it ever so slightly, I'm not pressing very hard at all. You can tell my knuckles are not changing colors. That right there added a super fine burr. Now that super fine burr will take a cut, but it doesn't go very deep, and it's a very light shaving. You see it's not flying off the lathe this time. It's just super fine cut. And that's generally what I like to do on my very last cut, because that right there is glass smooth. Now you can, with just a little bit more pressure or a few more passes, put a heavier burr back on. Oh yeah, and you'll notice how much heavier a shaving comes off. I'm not putting any more pressure towards it, but even the vibration you're hearing, that's just a heavier cut. Taking a bigger bite. It's kind of like extending the blade farther down from the sole of the plane. So, next time you're wood turning, before you start doing all that sanding or anything like that, hey, maybe consider refining the burr on your scraper to see what different kinds of results you could get. It doesn't take up off much wood, so you're not going to have to worry about damaging your work, and just play around. What does a heavy burr take off? What does a small burr take off? And realize how quickly you can go back and forth by simply removing it and adding it back on. You can do that 2 or 3 times before you have to go back to the grinder. So for today's bonus, I want to talk about one of my new favorite tools, or one I've been using for a couple years now, and it's just, the more I have it, the more I pull it out to use it, especially in turning, which we were discussing today with our sharpening. But before I do that one, if you like this video, if you like this series, please do me a favor, like, favorite, and subscribe. Do all those social medias. Tell your friends. Visit my website, wortheffort.com, where I run a blog, and I also sell a lot of swag, hats, some of my own woodwork, and I'm coming out with a whole bunch of shop-made tools, especially in the next 3 weeks, as fundraisers that help subsidize making this content for you. Hook knives are most commonly user-made tools. I mean, that people will bend the steel, they'll put the edge on them. They like specific bends on them and stuff like that. And you can get blacksmith-made ones, which is what everybody covets, but that can be really, really expensive. Robin Wood came out with his own line of hook knives, both left and right versions, what he calls open and closed. That depends upon if there's an even radius or if it kind of gets a little bit more gradual. This one I believe is open, right hand. And what he does is he puts an extra long handle on it. Most of these hook knives only have a handle about the size of your wrist. What I like about it is Hey, this has to be one of the best values on the market right now. I mean, for what you are getting, this is incredibly inexpensive. Great steel that he really does sweat the details on getting the right hardness, the carbon content, all that kind of stuff. And he has, these are all hand sharpened by a guy from Sheffield, and he's very proud of that one. All handmade. They even make their own handles and stuff like that. So he gets to control all the design and quality of it. But what I like about this one is, I'm not a very good spoon carver, but this is one of those tools I pull out for almost every single bowl or even boxes. Because you always have those little nubs on the bottom or the top, wherever the chucks or the drive spurs were. And with two hands, I can put the bowl in my lap, and then I can leverage and pivot and really scoop out a lot of material to smooth out the bottoms of my bowls. And this tool gets touched to so many tools like that, objects like that one, because I'm cleaning up the rest. Ooh, die ant, what are you doing here? See, it even splits ants right in half. So if you're looking to get into green turning or spoon carving or bowls or something like that, look up Robin Wood from up in England. Check out the handmade tools that he is producing. I mean, they're really good quality, exceptional value, and I can attest that you will find a use for something like a hook knife everywhere, even if you are a furniture maker or carpenter. I mean, they're just incredibly useful.